It's What the Farage time now. This is where the former Brexit Party leader gives us his take on the most show-stopping stories of the week. Later on, Nigel will be giving his verdict on Freedom Day. Is he excited, nervous or disappointed by Boris Johnson's plans for Monday? But first, Nigel, I know you were at that historic Euros final that was, marred not just by the result, but also behaviour by some of the fans. So I just want to kick off by getting your reaction to this breaking news today, that England will face 4 charges from UEFA over the brawling and storming of Wembley. Did you see any of that on Sunday?
Oh, yes, the whole lot. Now, you couldn't get a car anywhere near Wembley, unless you're Boris Johnson or David Beckham. So I caught the train from Marylebone, group of about 10 of us going to the game. We got into Marylebone at 5 o'clock, so 3 hours before the game. That was me earlier in the morning.
What a shot. What a shot.
Yeah, I was fairly conspicuous like that. But literally, as we came out of Wembley Station, and I looked down Wembley Way, I said to myself, what the Farage is going on here? Because there were only 65,000 people supposed to go into the game. What I saw before me, Dan, was 250,000 people. This most extraordinary human melee. And of course, the idiots that organised the game chose the time on a Sunday evening of 8 o'clock. What do you think very large numbers of unticketed young men were going to do all day until 8 o'clock? They were going to drink, weren't they? I mean, we can talk about changes of culture. The fact is, young English blokes have been doing this for centuries all over the world, and that was the first big mistake. The first big mistake was an 8 p.m. kickoff, which guaranteed problems. The second big mistake is, why were there not people at Wembley Station saying, unless you have a ticket, turn round and go back immediately? I saw no one giving that message. So we then had to get through a sort of human scrum that lasted several hundred yards. I was lucky. I had bodyguards, security guards with me to get me through. On my own, there's no way I would have made it. The worst that happened to me was a beer can hitting me on the back of the leg. We got through. I have to say, for the rest of the party I was with, they were very frightened and very intimidated. Then when we got to the front, we heard the noise as the barriers started to crash and as hundreds broke through into the stadium. And this was a very, very worrying moment. An hour later, it was even more serious. And a friend of mine reported a man being trapped under a fallen barrier, trapped by his legs, my friend helping him out. The stewards stood aside and did nothing. The police, at that moment before the game, were virtually invisible. And think about this. In 2015, at the height of the Paris terror attacks, at the Stade de France, before a French international, some sharp security guards stopped a man who was a suicide bomber. We could have had the worst terrorist attack this country has ever seen. We could have had a Hillsborough, because after 6 p.m., because of the number of people getting in without tickets, they literally closed the gates and kettled everybody. This was potentially one of the most public order events, most serious events in the history of our country. Now, I know that since the final whistle and since those penalties, there are some racist, horrible, nasty things that have been said on Twitter. Whether they're said by genuine England fans or whether they're by agents provocateurs anonymously on the internet from Russia, I don't know. And of course, things being said that are nasty about people aren't fun. But believe me, I have been going to sporting events for the last 40 years. I go to everything: rugby, football, cricket, horse racing, tennis, you name it. I'm a sports nut. I have never seen a worse organised or more dangerous event than I saw at Wembley on Sunday. And shame on the FA, shame on the police, and shame on Sadiq Khan, who is Mayor of London and has responsibility and oversight for all of these things. It was a massive massive balls up of the highest order. And, Boris, if you really think, after what occurred the other day, that we're going to successfully have a bid for the World Cup in 2030, you've got another thing coming. There needs to be an immediate public inquiry into what went wrong.
Wow, absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, Nigel, of course, there are so many aspects to this story, but you're not suggesting, are you, that our mainstream media may have actually missed the story again?
Totally. Look, I saw those 3 penalty kicks miss. I was there. In fact, I say, when I saw it, I was like this. I could sort of barely stand to watch it, having had a ticket for the World Cup final in 1990 and watch us lose on penalties and selling it at a discount. I've had 30 years of pain with this stuff. But look, people saying horrible things will never go away. Let's be frank, Twitter is a sewer, all right? And had the internet existed in 96, I've no doubt Gareth Southgate would have received abuse just as bad as Marcus Rashford or any of the others have received. But, mainstream media, it's racism, this must be a huge story, or maybe it is, but maybe, as I say, it's been put on there by agent provocateurs. I don't know. All I can tell you is this is the least racist country in the Western world, all right? And if there is a tiny minority who genuinely were abusive to those 3 players, well, none of us want to know them anyway, but they would be an absolutely tiny minority. What I'm talking about is public order. What I'm talking about in a modern age of global terrorism is how we manage major events. What I saw was failure that could have led to something catastrophic, and nobody is talking about it.
No, you're right. And you're also right, by the way, to talk about the origin of these tweets, because, again, it's something that most of the media is ignoring. But Gareth Southgate himself admitted that they had looked into this and discovered that actually probably a large proportion of these tweets were being sent from overseas. So we need to find out why, don't we? And secondly, an investigation by Channel 4 News actually showed that there were only less than 200 particularly abusive or tweets that I guess would reach the level of a hate crime. Now, that is despicable. That is disgusting. I have made it absolutely clear on the show, both today and yesterday, that none of that racist language can stand. But the point is, Nigel, these tweets, so this group of less than 200 tweets is being used to paint England, and it's mainly by the left, let's be honest, to paint England as a racist country.
Well,
and the point is, many of these tweets may have been sent by people from overseas, and surely we have to get to the bottom of that, and the government needs to get to the bottom of that with the social media companies.
But it's been a horrible fortnight for the left. I mean, the Cross of St. George. God help us. The awful Cross of St. George. The birth of English identity. People being proud to be English. I mean, this would never do, would it? So any excuse, any flag that was flown to knock the whole concept and therefore use, and if you're right, and out of 70 million people, 200 have behaved badly, Dan, I'm with you, we'll condemn the 200. But let's get a sense of proportion. About what's going on.
Let the police deal with them. Let the police deal with them. If it's a hate crime, arrest them and let them feel the full force of the law. But let's not paint the entire country as being racist. And that's all we've seen from most of the broadcast media over the past 48 hours.
As I say, Dan, had the 3 players that missed those kicks all been white, they would have been subjected to vile abuse as well. I met a female celebrity, right, in that stadium who'd had to go through that crowd as I'd gone through, all right? Now, she was subjected to 15 to 20 minutes of very, very unpleasant sexual taunts, all right? Now, she's big enough to deal with it, but let's not think that nasty things said on Twitter are the worst things that happened on Sunday night at Wembley. They were not. It is madness to have a game at 8 o'clock on a Sunday. We need to understand human behaviour and psychology. It must have been that time to suit foreign dignitaries or TV audiences, but never again should a major sporting event on a Sunday be at 8 p.m. You've got to understand, what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with human nature. But I saw stewards there as those barriers crashed down and we heard the din and saw people charging in. I saw stewards there, many of whom were even as old as me, most of whom were grossly overweight, totally incapable of dealing what was going on, disinclined to get involved. We even had a pitch invader, and the bloke was out there for 2 minutes as 3 overweight officials sort of trudged round the park trying to get hold of him. I mean, the whole thing was a complete and utter horlicks from start to finish that could have finished in catastrophe. And I repeat this, of course I want us to host the World Cup in 2030. But unless we are prepared to have an open, honest inquiry and take witness statements from ordinary folks, can you imagine people taking young children through all of that on Sunday night and how those kids must have felt going through it? My friend, who I mentioned earlier, who lifted the barriers of a poor older guy that was trapped, said to me literally, when they closed the place, when they locked it down because of a number of invaders, they were stuck with children in the nearest thing to a war zone for 1 hour. This is shameful.
Well, look,
it's much more shameful. It's much more shameful than 200 idiots on Twitter. It really is.
We're back with What the Farage. Nigel is here. Nigel, it's freedom, but not as we know it. Boris Johnson trying to dampen down the thought that we should be celebrating at all on Monday, even though it's the first time that we've got back our civil liberties and freedoms for many, many months.
Well, look, I mean, the idea that we should be grateful to the government that normal life can resume, I mean, I rather object to the concept. I mean, what right do they have to say that they own our freedom? That's the premise here, isn't it? They own our freedom and liberty, and aren't you jolly lucky? We're going to give it back to you on Monday, but we're not really going to give it back to you because you'll still have to stay behind after school. I mean, the whole thing's ridiculous. And let's be frank, it's not Freedom Day, is it? I mean, we all know that many of the restrictions will still be in place. There'll be little normality in life. And given the rising cases of a Delta variant, even though the official death toll for yesterday was 6, by the way, and deaths are still running, and I study the ONS figures every week that show 10,000 people die every week, and 1% a week. Some weeks it's a bit more, some weeks it's a bit less, but 1% a week die with COVID on their certificates. And I have to tell you, Dan, I have little doubt we'll be back in some form of lockdown by the middle of September, because the kids will go back to school, the sniffles will go around, and when I talk to people who say, well, we've got to be cautious, we've got to be careful, I say, well, for how long?
Yeah.
I mean,
Forever.
2022,
Forever.
23, 24, 25. Oh, what if there's a flu outbreak? Or what if pollution in London gets too bad? I mean, do we lock down for that as well? I mean, where does this precautionary principle take us? Look, I'm not underestimating the fact that this can be a horrid disease in some people, especially those who are vulnerable, overweight, suffering from medical conditions. We all know that, and we all know people that have died from it, and we're sad about that, and I know a handful of people that have died, not just with, but probably from COVID, all right? So I'm not underestimating it, but you simply cannot go on destroying our liberties and destroying our life forever against a threat that is not that great. And I keep hearing, we must save the NHS. Well, perhaps I've missed something here. I thought the NHS was there to save us. And because we've emptied the hospitals, we are now going to have more people die through missed diagnoses from cancer, from a backlog of operations that is now nearly 5.5 million long, more people will die through lack of medical care than will ever die from or with COVID. And I'd love us to have a rational, sensible debate about this, but the government have gone for fear. They've gone for fear. They've terrorised half the country. People are literally scared. Elderly people who've lived long lives have been locked in their houses for over a year. I mean, I can scarcely believe we've got to this. And they put on their television or turn on their radios and they hear adverts. Can you look into his eyes or her eyes? We're in a really, really odd place. I had expected this country, which I always thought was freedom-loving, with a belief in liberty, I'd expected us to protest a bit more than we have. All right, there were 250,000 people outside Wembley drunk, and maybe
the form of protest.
I mean, well, maybe there was a part of that was saying, we can all go out, but it should have been better managed. But I'm still surprised at the number of people I talk to who are extremely cautious about what they do and appear to be happy to live second-class lives. I'm just not one of them.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.